I'm delighted to be joined now by the foreign editor at the Australian newspaper, the brilliant Greg Sheridan. Greg, how are you?
Great to be with you, Rowan. I'm fine.
Now, Greg, talk us through this default, how significant it is. Does this help Ukraine, or is Russia actually free from its obligations? And does this open a whole other area?
Well, Rowan, no one could be more outraged or condemnatory or whatever of Russia than I am. But in a sense, they do have a technical defence on this default. The world has, or essentially the United States, has frozen their international reserves and prevented them from doing most of their trade in US dollar deals. Therefore, they don't have access to their own money, so to speak. This is not money that they've ripped out of Ukraine. This is money they had before the war. Now, I think the enormity of what they've done in Ukraine justifies these measures by the international financial system. But it's not like a country defaulting because its economy has fallen apart and it can't service its debt anymore. In fact, if anything, Russia is getting more money now from its energy exports than it was before the war began, because the prices have gone up astronomically and it's found plenty of other customers to sell its energy to replace the European customers it's lost.
Now, Greg, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said that the pressure on Russia is actually critical, not only for Russia, but in order to send a signal about the kind of pressures the Western alliance are likely to enact if China continues down the same route. Now, Greg, you and I, and many people have discussed this before, the fact that I guess the view that China is watching very closely Russia's invasion of Ukraine and kind of is it a blueprint or not for Taiwan? What are the lessons to learn from Taiwan if they try to invade Taiwan? Here's the Prime Minister basically reflecting that view.
China has been prepared to make sanctions not just against Australia, but to be more aggressive in its stance in the world. And it requires the world to move towards peace and security, but to do so in a way which says that we are prepared as democratic nations to ensure that when something happens like the invasion of Ukraine, the world is prepared to stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and provide practical and real support.
So, Greg, on this approach, I'm impressed with Anthony Albanese. I think he's showing some spine and standing up to China. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with you, Rowan. And, Albo, he does use a slightly more emollient tone than Morrison and Dutton did, but he's pretty blunt about China, isn't he, really? I mean, you can't really say he's gilding the lily in order to get diplomatic relations back to normal. And I do think his analysis is right, that China will draw a lot of lessons out of what's happening with Russia. I do think that the Russians concluded, because the Biden administration managed the Afghanistan withdrawal so hopelessly, that they wouldn't face much Western resistance in Ukraine. And while the Americans have declined to fight in Ukraine, they've given every support to the Ukrainian people. I think they could do a bit more, but they've given much more than Russia expected. So China takes that on board. The West is not so much of a busted flush as they might have thought after the withdrawal from Afghanistan. On the other hand, we don't know what lessons China will ultimately draw from this. They might decide that what the Russians have taught them is that you've got to go in with massive power immediately with no forewarning. The Russians talked about their invasion for months before they actually did it. The Chinese might decide that, a blitzkrieg approach would be effective in Taiwan. We just don't know. But the basic idea that the Chinese are looking very, very closely at this is right.
Now, Greg, you've written a piece in The Australian today, brilliant piece, no surprises there, about the Roe v. Wade decision I was just talking about. Run us through it and your thoughts in particular about Roe v. Wade.
Well, I think, Rowan, that this was a very good decision by the Supreme Court. It was the right decision legally. Roe v. Wade and the subsequent case, Casey, were very bad constitutional law. The American Constitution does not contain a right to abortion. The ruling which the Supreme Court has come up with does not outlaw abortion and does not mandate any restriction in travel between states to, go to pregnancy terminations, but nothing like that. All it does is it says the issue of abortion is rightly an issue for state governments, as are almost every other issue in American life. And now some states have very restrictive laws. I don't think they will last. I don't think you can politically sustain a law which says there are no abortions at all, except, in saving the mother's life after conception. I mean, that might be, there might be a good case for that morally, but I don't think you can sustain it. But similarly, I don't think you can sustain the New York law, which says abortion up to birth, and which is the position of the Liberal consensus. I think you've got to get much more varied, nuanced, variegated rulings, and if the rulings are a bit different from state to state, that's fair enough. If there are harsh rulings in a given state, the government that enacts them will be turned out at the next state election. That's democracy. That's where this issue always should have been decided, not by unelected judges.
100% agree, Greg. And we've seen how desperate and grotesque the extreme left's response is. And I think you're right. Most sensible, nuanced people will look for a more balanced approach to it. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for coming on the Bolt Report this evening.